there's a couple of things we'll go over, and I know we're a little short on time, so I'll kind of breeze through these, but we'll talk about DAX. We'll talk about row versus filter context, which is an important concept when you're trying to get the calculations to do exactly what you want them to do. And then we'll talk about how you can modify that filter context. So just some groundwork. DAX is data analysis expressions. It's the same formula language that you use in Power BI, analysis services, Excel. And there's an example here on the screen. Total sales equals the sum of some field. So whether you're creating calculated columns or you're using measures, this is what we'll use to do formulas in Power BI. So this is what we'll talk about today, just as the general layout for how they look. And also I want to mention too, before I start, your best friend here is going to be, that's weird, why did it do that? So when you're learning about filter and row context, it's going to do some weird things. So I used to get frustrated by that, but now I just look at it and say, like I want to see why it answered the question the way that it did. And that helps you really learn how it works. So to start, when you're looking at a particular row in a table in Power BI, that's row context. And I'll show some examples a little bit further up, but that's the row you're working with. One thing that it's important to remember about row context is it has to do with the table you're in, and it doesn't propagate across relationships unless you tell Power BI what to do. So if you're looking at a particular customer and you say, show me all their sales, but you don't tell Power BI how to get to that other table, it's not going to know what to do. But it's who are you asking the question about? Filter context, alternatively, is the view of the Power BI model that your current calculation has. So whether it's a slicer or a visual or a filter statement that modifies that, when you do a calculation, that calculation access, hopefully my dog in the background is not too loud. That calculation has access to a portion of the Power BI model, and your filter context is going to control how that looks. So just as some examples here, you have this table, you've got, and this is a Contoso table, but you've got for sales quantity, you've got these different fields: unit cost, price, quantity. The row context is something I do inside the row without leaving that row. So in this case, I'm checking to see if it's a big sale, and I do that by seeing, did they buy more than 5 things? I don't have to leave the row to find that out. I just look at the sales quantity, it's bigger than 5, so I'm good to go. But as soon as I add an aggregate or I add a calculation, I'm going to move out of the row context into the filter context. So in this case, I'm saying total items, and I'm summing the sales quantity. Once you leave row context and you move into filter, it has no concept of the original row anymore. You're just looking at a part of the data model now. So it now has forgotten, and I'll show this in some examples, it's now forgotten about the row that you were in originally. And then you can modify that filter context once you've moved out of the row context. So once you've moved into a bigger view here with a calculation, you then can modify your context. Okay. Okay, so I'll do a quick demo on what I mean by row and filter context. So let me switch to Power BI. Can you see Power BI, or do I need to reshare?
Reshare.
Okay, let me find Teams here and reshare for you. Let me see if it'll let me share my whole screen. Oh, cancel. I'll just share my whole screen here. Okay, you see Power BI now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what I'll do here is I'll just switch over to the data view, and I will come over here to the product sales, or to the sales table. So once I'm in the sales table, if I want to create a calculation that uses just something inside this row, I'm okay to do that. So let's say I want to see sales quantity times the unit price. So I can create a calculated column here. So I'll create a new column. And I want that column to be equal to sales quantity. Once it comes up here, sales quantity times is it unit count? Unit price. So you can see here that it offered me, for IntelliSense, it offered me things from my current table, but it doesn't offer me anything from another table. And the reason that it does that is because I'm still in my row context and it doesn't know how to get anywhere else. So if I say unit price, there's my calculation, I'm good to go. And then I look at my new field and it's going to show me whatever for that, that particular row. So you can see the different values here, depending on what's in that particular row, that sales amount and the units. But if I was to create a new column and I was to say, let's do sum of total cost. So what I would have thought this would do originally was, well, I'm calculating it as part of a column, right? So for this cell right here, I've got a row, I've got a total cost. So why wouldn't it just show me the total cost for that row? But that's not what it does. What it does is it calculates, now that I'm doing an aggregate, it takes a step back and say, okay, how much of the data model can I see? And it gives me the total cost for my entire table, which may be what you expect, but it may very much not be what you expect. So that's the difference kind of on a basic level between row and filter. As soon as you do an aggregate or a calculate or a filter, you're moving out of the context of that row. And I could do, the other thing I'll mention too is once I come out to the visual here, when you start to drop things on the visual canvas, so let me say I'll do sales amount, so I'll drop that here, and I get my total sales amount. And then if I drop, let's say, product category on here, what's actually happening behind the scenes is it's looking at all the product categories on the axis and it's applying a filter context, because now that I'm looking at a visual, there's no context of where the rows came from or where they belong. It's just looking at the entire data model. So what happens, and we'll demonstrate this, what happens is you're looking at computers, and so it filters the category table to computers and then applies that filter context across the data model. So then everything tied to a computer product category gets calculated here, and you have 3 billion and change worth of sales. It's a pretty big company, and then cameras and TVs and things like that. So what Power BI is doing here is it's applying a filter context, and then if I was to drop a slicer on here, like geography, let's say, I'll just drop it on there as another table, and then I'm going to click on something particular. And it's going to apply a bigger filter. It's going to filter the context that I have down to just computers sold in North America. And so I'll show how to do that and how to modify that filter context. So let's go back here. So now when we talk about modifying the filter context, we're going to use a statement called calculate. And what calculate does is it tells Power BI, hey, I'm about to do a calculation, but I want you to do it in a way that is different from the way you would naturally do it. So if you think about, so let me create a measure over here and say, I'm going to do total sales equals sum of sales amount, let's say. So I'm just going to say, hey, Power BI, go ahead and do the sum of sales amount. So then I can take my brand new total sales and I can drop it on here. And there's my total sales right there. And then, but I've told Power BI, just do it however you want to do it. But what we can do with a calculate is we can modify that context. So in this case, we can aggregate from one table while filtering a related table. We can remove filters on particular columns, which is what I find particularly useful. And you can tell Power BI to do something different than it would normally do. So here's an example here. So I've created a measure. I'm using the calculate statement, and you can see, just like I did, I'm doing some sales amount, but I'm applying a filter, and I'm saying before you calculate that sum of sales amount, filter the sales table down to only years greater than 2018. So then what will happen is Power BI will apply this additional filter in addition. So I'm not using any modifiers here. So I'm not using something like all or all except. I'm not modifying the filter. So it's going to take what it already sees and it's going to apply this additional filter. So if I go back here and I'm going to create another total sales, but I'm going to say total sales since 2018, I'm going to say calculate. And in this case, I can actually calculate the total sales measure that I already have, because remember, total sales is just sum of sales. And in this case, I'm going to apply a filter, and I'm going to filter, what was it, the sales table, where the year of the sales date key is greater than 2018, and I want to make sure I'm going to have data. Okay, greater than or equal 2018. So here I am. I've applied this additional filter, and I have sales since 2018. And what I can do here is I can then drag that onto my chart, and you'll see that Power BI. Oh, I must have an older copy of Contoso that doesn't have any sales after 2018. Let's look at the date key here. Oh goodness, 2013. All right, so let's actually modify that a little bit. Let me say total sales since 2013. That worked properly in the copy of Contoso that I had on my other laptop. So you can see here now that Power BI is calculating sum of sales right here. But when I calculate this one right here, it's applying an additional filter and saying everything 2012 and earlier, I don't care. I don't want that in my calculation. And it's showing just the sales since 2013. See, it's 1 billion versus 3.2 billion. So that's a simple example of how to use calculate, and those filters can get pretty complicated, and they don't have to be, even though filter is the word you're using, they don't have to be restricting the data set. They can also expand the data set or filter related tables, which I'll show in a little bit as well. So here's an example of how filter context works if you want to think about the propagation. So if you think about states here, states is joined over to this states table, which I don't show here, but imagine that it is. And then city is joined over to the city table right here. Well, I want to apply a filter. So I want to modify my filter context. So let's say I filter states to just California. What's going to happen is that filter is going to propagate over to the states and cities table, and it's going to show me just the cities that are in California. Then it's going to propagate over again and show me just the cities over here, just the stores that are in cities that link to California. So when you apply a filter over here, when you modify the filter context in state, you can see that it propagates over. Okay, so I've shown it a calculate, but we can also do the filter propagation. So let me come back over here and I'll say, let's grab a measure here and say sales in Europe. Oh, let's assume I can spell it. Do calculate again, just like I did. I'm going to calculate total sales. Now I want to filter a different table, because remember, I'm calculating sales in the sales table here, but let's say that I filter the geography table, filter geography, and I want continent name equals Europe. So now I have total sales in Europe. So what I'll do is I'll drag that over, and again, you can see it'll add it right here. So sales in Europe, there it is. It's a little red bar, and it's calculating it for each of these categories. But what's interesting about this is that if I come over here and I say geography continent name, so let's say I don't want to break it up by product category, I want to break it up by continent now. Well, Europe has sales for sales in Europe, but it's blank for Asia and North America, because when it calculates that sales in Europe right there, it's applying the filter to say, I only want sales in Europe because that's what our measure does right here. I'm filtering just for Europe. So you can modify that. So there's let me see if I'm going to cover it. Okay, so modifying filter context. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. Let's say I want to do something like, I want to know, no matter what I look at, I want to see all the sales for everywhere. So let me do another measure here. And sales all geography. So I'm going to do, again, I'll do a calculate, again, total sales, but I'm going to apply a different kind of filter here. I'm going to do all geography. So what I'm doing with this filter, or this modifier here, is I'm saying whatever you're applying to the geography filter, I don't care. I want you to remove that filter when you do this calculation. So now, if I was to take sales in all geography, and I was to, let's drop it on here, and let's say I want to see it by product category again. So you can see that it breaks up by product category just fine. Okay, I'm all good. But if I filter to Europe over here, it doesn't care. This one's not going to be modified because I'm just filtering for Europe, and it's ignoring the filter that's being applied to geography. So same up here, where if I drop this onto here, I'm going to get total sales for it's going to show total sales for every continent. North America is going to show total sales, Asia will show total, and Europe will show total, because I'm ignoring the filter context created by this category at the bottom. So something like this would be useful if I wanted to say percentage of total sales. So here I can say, let me create a new measure, and let me say something like percent of all geography, and I'm going to do total sales divided by what did I call my measure? Sales all geography. I'm clearly not naming these in a consistent way. So here I've got a calculation that says, okay, take the total sales for whatever the context is right now, and then remove the filter on geography. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to make it a percent, and then let me pull this in here. So I'm going to ditch the total sales here. Okay, so you can see it's 100% of audio sales happen in every continent. What it's doing for the numerator is it's doing total sales of audio, and for the denominator, it's total sales of audio across every continent. So it's going to be 100% for every one of these. But if I was to replace product category with continent name, you can see that now I've got 59% of my sales happening in North America, 21 happening in Asia, and then 19 happening in Europe. Because each of these columns, the numerator takes that continent into account. The denominator underneath is total sales ignoring continent. And so you can break that down further by store location or anything else that you have in your data set. So you can expand or you can restrict the filter context that you're using. I'll go ahead and pause there for a moment, actually. I don't know if there are any questions that are in the queue or if that makes sense. I'm not sure, Brian, if you can see any feedback or have any questions at this point that I can clarify. I know we're moving kind of quickly through it.
No questions in the queue right now. If anyone has any, feel free.
All right. So there are a couple of things to know as you're working with these, and these are, again, some kind of weird ahas as you're working with it. One is when you're combining multiple filter criteria, what I tend to do, and I used to get better performance in Power BI when I did this, and I haven't done testing in the last probably year and a half, so I don't know if this is still the case. But what I would encourage you to do just for readability is when I do something like sales in Europe, I'll move this to a new line to make it a little bit easier to read. If you're going to apply multiple filters, I would apply those as separate filter statements. So I could say geography. So I could say I'm going to filter the geography table based on these two things. But what I would encourage you to do instead is say, okay, I'm going to filter geography again, and I'm going to filter it based on this other criteria that I have. Maybe it's store location or something like that. So if you include them in separate statements, you give Power BI the flexibility to traverse the data model however it wants to do that. One thing I forgot to mention earlier. So there's a keyword that people use sometimes called earlier. So what the earlier keyword does is it's a little tough to explain, but what it does is it moves out of your current filter context modifier back to the original one or back to the previous one. So if you were to say calculate total sales and then you were to filter, you could apply that. Where I normally see the earlier keyword getting applied is like, let's go back to this. Let's go back to this this table here. And if you remember before, I created this column where I said, here's a bunch of stuff. Here's a big sum going on here. But if I was to say, calculate sum of total cost, and then I'm going to filter I'm in the sales table, and I'm going to say where product key actually, is there a product ID or like a customer ID in this table? Okay, so there's actually a sales key, so I'll just actually use sales key. That's a good demo of what's happening here. So where sales key equals earlier sales key. So what will happen when I do this is I'm telling Power BI, hey, you're going to filter sales key, but you're going to filter it to equal whatever sales key was before you modified the context. So in that case, it should actually show me the total cost value for that specific line. And the reason it's doing that is because it's leaving the filter context modifier and it's going back to the original sales key value and it's filtering. The sales table is a little hefty, so this might have been the wrong thing to click actually do it on. So you can use the earlier or the earliest modifier. So you can see here, these are different values now, and they should match whatever the total sales, whatever the sales amount or the total cost is, not the sales amount. So you can see here that I've escaped that. What I actually prefer to do, and I think it's a little bit easier to read, what I prefer to do in cases like this is use a variable. So I'll say var sales key equals sales key. And so I haven't left my row context yet, so I'm safe to do that. And then down here, I'll say return, and then I'll just do my calculate statement, but I'll have the sales key equal my variable, my sales key variable like that. I think that's a little bit easier to read because you can see when you say earlier, you don't have to do the gymnastics to say, okay, and where am I going? What does the filter context look like at that time? You can just do the calculation up here as a variable. And if you're not using variables, I would highly encourage you to do it. You can put anything you want in a variable. You can put value there. You can put a table there. You can put whatever that you're going to use later in your calculation. So here, I'm going to get the exact same result. It'll take a few seconds, and then it'll report the same thing on those tables. Yeah, I'll mention again, remember that, so I showed when you do an aggregation that the calculated column doesn't know what row it came from. Measures never have a native context. So here's actually my favorite one that totally mystified me the first time that I did this. So I'll show you here. So let me take product category, and I'll put product category, let's make a matrix. I'll put product category across the top, and then I'll take product subcategory and I'll put that on the rows. I'm sure you can't see this because it's incredibly small, but you'll have to trust me that that's what they look like. And then I'm going to go down here and I'll grab total sales and I'll dump it in there. Okay, everything's fine. You can see here that I don't have my Zoom installed in this computer. You can see here that, like, for example, car video is a subcategory of TV and video, right? So there's only sales in the matching area. But let's say that I do a new measure and I do just one, and I do sum, or not even have to do sum of one, I'll just do one. So no matter where I drop this measure, it's going to equal 1. So I'll show you here. If I just drop this here, it's going to give me a, it's going to give me the number 1. That's it, right here, 1. So the trickery comes in when I look at this table here, and what I would expect if I remove this and I drop my just 1 on here, what I would expect is for Power BI to say, hey, car video is only a valid combination with TV and video. So I'm only going to put a 1 right there. There's no reason I would put a 1 in car video in the audio category because there's no data. That's not a valid combination. But that's not at all what Power BI does. Power BI just says 1 goes everywhere. And the reason 1 goes everywhere is because this measure has no filter context applied to it by default. So it really doesn't, I haven't taken any context into account when I do this 1. It's just 1 no matter what. So you just dump it here and it says, oh, car video and computers, done. That's a 1 right here. So there's no context applied. So in cases like that, you have to be careful that whatever your calculation is actually refers to some table that has anchoring in the visual that you're creating. So you can, let's say, you maybe could modify this to say, I'm going to check to make sure that in the square I'm in, category has some rows and, or subcategory has some rows and category has some rows. Now I know it's safe to do this calculation. Again, I would encourage people to write for readability, so comments, variables, that kind of thing. And then as you're thinking about scalability and data refreshes, one thing to remember is that calculated columns are recalculated when you refresh the data model, but measures are calculated when you display them or when you modify the filters. So if you're going to be making something highly interactive that's not refreshed very often, you should lean towards the calculated columns. And if you're not, if you're going to make something that's not very interactive, you'll want to lean towards measures because it's just going to display once and be done. Let me see. Oh, that was my weird stuff demo. And so then, as I put at the end of all of these presentations, maybe this is some new tool, this clarified something for you. I hope it did. You really kind of go through 4 stages, right? Where you don't know anything, and then you move on to, this seems great and I need to learn more about it. I'm kind of afraid to use it. And then you move on to, this is going to solve every one of my problems in every imaginable situation. I'm going to use it everywhere. And then you transcend that as you learn more into the, this seems a little dangerous. I probably should know what it does and use it in the appropriate situations. So then when we look at something like this, hopefully this is a little bit less scary. It's not a great formula, right? But you can kind of look at what it's doing, right? It's just calculating the max of new value, and then it's applying all these filters beyond the context it's currently in, right? It's filtering the changes table, and then it's getting this value from before the calculate, it's filtering again, and then it does another calculate down here, and you can see there's actually an earliest down here as well. So that gets member ID from outside the calculate, from the very beginning. And in this case, I'd replace both of those with the same variable, right? Because you could just set a variable up here before your calculate statement. All right, so I blew through that kind of quick, but that's the overview of row versus filter context and how you modify those in the data model. So I don't know if there are any questions that people have, or if there's something specific that you want me to demo to answer a question that you're having. I hope that was informative. All right, Brian, I guess I'll open it up to any feedback or any questions.
Sure, just waiting on some questions if anyone has any.
I would turn my camera on too, but I'm afraid of dragging down the internet again, so I'm going to leave it off. Not because I'm super private, but I just want to be able to answer any questions that come up.
Understandable.
Okay, well, while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, at the end of our presentation, I've got some references that I used for this presentation that I've used for others I'd encourage you to know about. And then I always put this one at the very end too. There's a couple of DAX keyboard shortcuts that you can use that I really love, like Control-Shift-L is my favorite one. If I come in here to let me find a good one. So like do sales, you can do Control-Shift-L, and then I highlight everything. So then I can go, I'm going to change that. Like I can just type something in and it shows up everywhere that I had sales. So if you're changing the variable name in a bunch of different places, total sales per person or whatever, you can modify all the instances in your calculation together. So that one's kind of fun.
I had no idea that DAX had hotkeys. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it does. So let's go back here and see what else we got. Shift Enter and Control Enter, I use those a lot. So I use that in the demo. If you do Shift Enter, it takes you back down to where that line started, so you can keep your tabs in place. Alt up and down, that one's super fun. So if I have let me type some stuff. These are all kind of look the same, so it's not a great example, but I can go Alt up and it moves this line up or down in my. So if you write something, like write a variable, you can move it up out of the way and rearrange things pretty easily without copying and pasting. Yeah, that's only a few of them. There's a whole one of these. I think I have one of these. Oh, the hotkey reference list. They're mostly undocumented hotkeys, but there's like 20 or 30 of them that are in there. Not that you're going to become a speed demon with DAX, but they do kind of help out.
Yeah, I've never heard those come up. That's really cool.
Yeah, I wish they were documented, but I guess they're just things the developers slid in because they were tired of redoing something. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And again, apologies for the apologies for the late start and the technical difficulties. I appreciate you going with the flow. Clearly, I was a little late on my technical check, and an hour was not enough time to prepare the new laptop to do a demo.
No worries. We appreciate you joining us. Still no
absolutely
coming in. I did already post the link to the form to win an Amazon gift card, so thank you to those still hanging out with us. Thank you so much for your time, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you the presentation, and then you can post it wherever you do. All right, thanks everyone. Take care. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me at any of the places I posted in the beginning of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have.